You know where I'm going to start this. I never dreamed that Tampa would get their stadium situation done this quick. And frankly, I wasn't all that convinced they'd ever get it done. Give me some thoughts.
Well, first of all, it's not done yet, but it appears as though it will get done. I'm happy for the franchise. I'm happy for their fans. The current ballpark, George, that was built to try to lure teams in the 1980s. I was with one of those franchises, the White
The
Sox,
White Sox.
and it just wasn't. It never was a really great facility. Hasn't aged well. Um, the renderings of the ballpark that we're seeing right now from Billy, thank you. They're spectacular. They look great. I'm really happy for the team. It appears as though they're going to get it right. They're going to put a $30,000 capacity. I mean, $30,000. Hello, 30,000 person capacity, and I think it's going to really not only help the franchise, but I think it'll give the Tampa Bay franchise, which has been elite on the field, now it'll make it elite on the field. And I think what it really does, George, is the two teams that we've been talking about on your show for years, Oakland and Tampa Bay, look to have their situations rectified now. And as a result, the Nashville market and other markets throughout North America now have an opportunity to focus on their expansion chances. And I think it's very real now that those teams seem to have their situations fairly thought through.
Danny, other people in Major League Baseball, I've had two or three people give me the same thing, which is not, hey, Nashville's in a group. I've had two or three say Nashville is absolutely number one. Do you believe that?
I think there's 7 cities, George, that are going to be vying for this opportunity. I think it begins with Portland and Nashville. I think Charlotte's in there. I think Montreal and Vancouver will make bids, as will Salt Lake City. I think San Antonio will make a fair bid. And I think those are the 7 areas that'll vie for opportunities. For me, and it's strictly me, I believe that it's Portland and Nashville and then the others. And it's just, for me, I just think those are two vibrant communities that could immediately support a club. And I think the time is really a great one for expansion in Major League Baseball.
Okay, let me try it this way.
Mhm.
Because deep down, I never really thought it was going to play the way it is right now, which is when Vegas, Oakland got their thing together. I never dreamed Tampa would 2 months later have its deal done. So, baseball winter meetings are here in Nashville in early December. Do you believe that MLB is going to tell all of these cities, have your stuff together when we meet at the winter meetings?
George, it's a very complicated process. There's an expansion committee that's chaired by ownership, that's staffed by ownership. First of all, we have to look at it. It's a collectively bargained part of the labor agreement. So as a result, it'll have to be collectively bargained with the 30 major league teams. There are expansion fees, costs, all sorts of rules, all sorts of issues regarding players. So that's the first step that'll have to take place. It is currently not scheduled in Major League Baseball, so that's the first component. Secondly, George, behind the scenes, each of those 7 cities that I've talked about, and then probably more, have issues and conversations behind the curtain with people from Major League Baseball about their chances, about their city's pitch for a Major League Baseball situation. Those ownership committees recognize that it's an exclusive club. There's a lot of money involved, but there's also a lot of television money that has to be carved up 2 or 4 more ways. And as a result, the teams are going to want what's right for themselves at the same time. There's geographic rights, there's areas and territories. So I think what we have here is a number of instances where people are already interacting, whether or not the Nashville winter meetings in December or the first weekend will be the place. I don't know, but I know one thing. Those conversations have been going on for an extended period. I don't know if it would be fair for the other teams if Nashville was the site of those meetings. Those meetings are virtuals, they're conference calls. There's a lot of discussion items. I've been through expansion a few times in my career, and it's an elongated, very much prolonged and negotiated period. So, George, candidly, this is not going to happen quickly, but this is not the beginning of the process. I'm sure each of these viable candidates have had extensive conversations with people within Major League Baseball about their opportunities that are upcoming.
Danny, to my knowledge, there has been nobody locally that has stepped up to say, I want to do this. Now, there is the
Mhm.
rumor of Bill Haslam, our former governor, who also is about to become majority owner of the NHL Nashville Predators. I would assume pretty quickly that either he will squelch those rumors or perhaps fuel them because he's certainly going to be asked. When you brought up expansion fees, kind of give people a ballpark of what you're talking about.
Well, they're huge, George, but there hasn't been expansion in an extended period. So we'd just be speculating, but it's going to have a B in it. It's going to be a billion. It's going to be
Was.
huge. I mean, teams, currently are averaging 1.5 to $3 million in value. And if you think about it, it has to be cut up 31 ways, the 30 teams and the central office. And I mean, the Players Association is going to negotiate because it's going to mean a lot of jobs. There's immediately 26 more jobs per team. There's all sorts of opportunities. There's minor league opportunities. This is a really exciting thing. I mean, very candidly, George, it's my dream someday to be part of an expansion team. I would love it because you're starting from scratch. You get to create your own problems, your own destiny, your own branding. But I think what we have here is a value that we don't know. We haven't seen since, I believe, 1997 when Arizona came in to the game. So I think it's going to be a very interesting challenge. I think for the clubs that are looking at it, trying to get in, you've got to be capitalized, George, because you've got a lot of initial costs without revenue. You've got to go out and scout. You've got to have a stadium. You've got to have a brand. And as a result, there are upfront costs that are humongous. I mean, they're just massive. And I think you're going to have a very capitalized guy. Now, I will say this. I think it's very hard in today's world to have one person be that person. I think you're going to see a collection of people with deep pockets who have, the ability to check numerous boxes, whether they're local, whether they have community businesses, whether they check diversity and inclusion boxes, whether they're vibrant financially, do they have any problems in the background? Major League Baseball was embarrassed by the situation with the McCourts about
Yeah.
15 years ago, and they don't want to go through that again, especially when the time of the game's financial situation is at an all-time best. So the vetting out period, George, will be difficult. Whoever steps forward, George, sometimes it's actually a smarter, more strategic move not to come forward until the right time so people don't poke holes in your ownership group. But one thing's for certain, for places like Nashville, for Portland, for some of the other entities, they're not going to have any shortage of interest. It's going to be, can they find the right mix that sounds the best to the ownership within Major League Baseball?
Okay, I've been pretty vocal about where I think we are. The John Lore Group, I think, has done a terrific job of getting the name recognition out there. They're constantly putting stuff out there. Do I think they have an owner? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
I hear that Dave Stewart is the lead gun these days trying to find that owner. I'll admit I don't have a ton of confidence there. So I'm going to ask this question, Danny. Does Major League Baseball want Nashville enough that they would say to the city, we'll find the owner for you?
George, that's been done, but also, the vibrant markets like Nashville don't have any shortage of interest. It's a matter of getting some local ownership
Right.
that have skin in the game and that have, for everyone who's in, the Nashville area, you don't want somebody coming in from the outside who has no ties to the area because then you're tone deaf about the area. It's very important to have local ownership that's embedded in the community, doing great things in the community, because suddenly you've got 162 days of social awareness, of a chance to make an impact in a positive way in the community. It's very important you're not tone deaf. But George, sometimes there are partnerships where Major League Baseball brings people to the table saying, hey, they've been vetted out. This is a great group. If you combine with them, we'd have considerable interest in your group. I will say this. I have no doubts about Nashville being able to support a team. The community itself is vibrant. It's got a great demographic. I think its proximity to a number of markets actually is a plus. And the fact that they've been such a solid host of AAA and AA baseball for half a century, there's no doubt in my mind that Nashville supports a big league team.
Okay, this is one that I ought to know better, but I really don't. And frankly, when I ask the question, I get a bunch of different answers. So you got St. Louis to the northwest. You've got Atlanta to the south. You've got Cincinnati just flat out north, Cubs a little more north. So you got four teams that have some Nashville stuff going. The Braves being the one that has the most. Is
Mhm.
there a territorial rights problem where those franchises are going to say, no, because we do too much business out of that community, you'd be hurting us?
George, great question. Every team has its own territorial rights as part of their franchise charter. Um, I don't have access to those. They may creep in, but I don't think so. I've never heard it surface before. I heard it surface when the Vancouver option, or at least alternative, was out there because of the Mariners. It's a decidedly important part of the negotiation, but also, George, everything's negotiable. So if somebody does have a territorial rights situation or conflict, that can be negotiated with the team. Just as, for instance, when the Nationals moved from Montreal and they went from Montreal to DC, the Orioles were directly impacted. And there were some issues there that went in. When Oakland came to San Francisco in the mid 60s, there was a plug in there. So that's always a negotiated part of the deal. And again, that's one of the reasons why the ownership committee is such a critical component in this decision making process, because the 30 owners need to sign off before there's any vote on expansion.
I'm going to ask one or two more. By the way, Kelly's not here today, so you're going to deal with
Mm-hmm.
Billy a little bit at
I
some
love
point.
it.
Billy, you're listening to the whole expansion thing in a minute. If you've got something on that front,
Got it.
I'll get you in here in a minute. Okay, you've made very clear something that, look, there's not going to be some grand parade at the winter meeting saying, "Hey, it's Nashville." How long is this going to take?
I don't know, but it's already occurring. It's been going on, George. If you are one of the prospective cities, you have been connecting and pitching and promoting your city's situation as well as you possibly can for an extended period. I remember at the winter meetings years ago, Jerry Reinsdorf brought me to a meeting of the potential expansion candidates, and they had their ballpark, their finances, their demographics. It was fascinating. I think you'll see that in Nashville, but you would see that wherever the winter meetings is. It will not be something that the teams will be out there a whole lot, because you also don't want to aggravate the people on the ownership committee. They're the people that you need to pitch. Rob Manfred, the baseball commissioner, and his staff are the ones you need to pitch. But I think what we have here, George, is a situation where, for the first time in an extended period, it's pretty clear that the two teams that were really in trouble appear to have solutions to their problem. And as I've said on this show numerous times, George, until Oakland and Tampa Bay were figured out, expansion was never going to get on the front burner. It wasn't in the best interest of the game. But now the game is vibrant. The two franchises appear to have solutions. Now you can start turning the focus to the next round of expansion as to whether it's 2 or 4 clubs. The timing, I'm not sure. But I know one thing, it's a lot clearer and a lot less murky, and you don't have the what if situation. Will they move? I mean, you and I have talked about this. Will a team have to move into the Nashville or the Portland market? It appears now a best case scenario for cities, and that is you get to start fresh and you get to start with your own team, which is an unbelievably positive situation for any ownership group.
Okay, here's another one. I'm trying to think through all the stuff I ought to be asking. And so this segment's going to run a little longer than normal. So I've almost forgotten what it was I was going to ask. This is a senior moment that happens as a junior. So, Danny, when all of this goes down, I have lost Billy. If you got something, I have lost a train of thought on a damn good question that apparently wasn't good enough to remember.
Oh, no worries. Well, Danny, in terms of Nashville, is there any comparison? Obviously, you've witnessed expansion in Major League Baseball. When you look back at some of these expansion teams, would Nashville be totally different than a lot of the other ones, or was there a franchise maybe that you remember when they were expanding and kind of building? I know Nashville is probably 10 years away at the quickest, probably. So it's not. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But is there any comparison to maybe a city like a Nashville getting a major league team?
By the way, I've remembered the question, and it is a good one, so I'm going to pop it in a minute.
Yeah, and Billy, I think it'll be sooner than a decade. I think it'll happen in the next, I don't know, they'll probably assign teams 3 to 5 years from now. The labor agreement is the first part that has to be talked about. I'm just thinking about past franchises. I think Kansas City is a good model.
Yeah.
I think Seattle was a fabulous decision, but it was also pressured because of the 1969 Seattle Pilots departure to Milwaukee. I think Phoenix, the Arizona Diamondbacks. I look at the Colorado Rockies back in the early 90s as a very similar situation. Denver was thought of as a cow town by a lot of people, and it had just incredible growth, and they were able to sell Major League Baseball that this city is vibrant, and the city I live in is able to host a team and would be a great market. Tampa Bay was easy because the teams were in Florida every year. Miami, the same thing. I think those two teams have sputtered, and they've sputtered, I think, because of a combination of subpar ownership at times, poor stadium facilities, and also miscalculation as far as whether it was going to be a vibrant entity. But I think Nashville is poised. And Billy, to fully answer your question, I think Portland and Nashville, very honestly, are in a great situation, but also Charlotte, Montreal, Vancouver, Salt Lake City. There are cases for each of those sites. It's going to come down to how well capitalized are you? What's your ownership look like? Can you build a stadium? What do your demographics look like? What are you going to do in the community? And for me, most importantly, are you bringing people into the ownership group that these other club members value as positive additions to Major League Baseball?
Okay. The cynic in me reading the Tampa thing is saying, okay, this ownership group is going to pour 600 million in. What happened to all that poverty they've been crying for all these years when they had no payroll and suddenly they've got 600 million? Okay, that's a little commentary. But secondly, are we now in an era where the ownership is going to have to foot 50% of a stadium that I know full well right now, given that we're building the Titans a dome, we haven't got the money.
It's awful hard in these times with inflation where it is, and the interest rates being where they are, and the fact that there are so many things that municipalities, counties, and states have on the front part of their desk that they have to solve. And I think it's going to be very hard for a team to get a publicly fully funded ballpark, the magnitude of which what we're talking about, George. It has to be future proof. It has to be an enormous investment. We're talking, over $1 billion of investment. You got to get the land. There's so much to go on. And again, that's part of the discussion. Look what happened in Oakland. They were talking about the great location down by the bay. Well, that went away. And then suddenly they manage a much smaller parcel that might be a really great venue, but nothing like what they were talking about at the terminal in Oakland. So it's going to be a matter of land. It's going to be a matter of whether or not, you talked about the Titans. Building that new stadium, that's going to complicate things for the Nashville group when they start talking about a baseball team. But I will say this, 81 dates and what a baseball team does for a community in terms of bringing revenue into the community, it is remarkable what happens over the course of 81 games. So there'll be no shortage of interest, George, but it's also not going to be the easiest task. What you said about Tampa Bay, I snicker too. But you know what? Sometimes to vie for an opportunity, you have to say things, do things, act things. But I do see in everything I've read a commitment from the Tampa ownership to the community and to St. Petersburg.
Okay, I've tried to run through just about everything I could think of that we needed to ask given this development.
I thought of something else.
Oh.
And I saw this on Twitter, or X, of course, and everything's true on X, right? But Danny, if Nashville gets an expansion team, and I guess it might be when now, will they be American League or National League? How would that? What does that discussion look like?
Don't know. I think you'll see an even number of teams in the leagues. They're 15 and 15 right now, which necessitates interleague play, which really does mess with the schedule. I think ideally they'd like to have 16 or 18 teams in their leagues. So I think it'll just come down to geographics, Billy, and it'll also come down to where the franchises are, who the two teams are. Ideally, you'd love to space them out. You'd love to put one in each league or two in each league, and whether or not it'll be an American or a National League setup, or Billy, whether they'll restructure the divisional setups and they could just extinguish the two leagues and go to more of a regional situation. And that's been discussed by many people within Major League Baseball.
Interesting.
Okay, after the break, we'll run through a graphic of where the playoff potential stuff is right now, because it's gotten crazy. And we're going to get Danny to sort of handicap it a little. And I'll ask the question as a Braves fan, should I be worried about their pitching? My answer is yes. Let's hear what his is when we come back. The races in the wild card stuff is absolutely insane. So let's take a look we'll start with the National League on the left. The 3-6 matchup will end up playing the Dodgers, it would appear. The Dodgers right now are the 2 seed. Milwaukee is entrenched as the 3 for now, we think. Who the 6 is, who in the world knows? Danny, how tight is that?
National League's great right now. There's a game this afternoon that'll really settle one of the arguments. Is San Francisco still alive? They're playing the Diamondbacks.
Yep.
If the Diamondbacks should beat them, I think San Francisco's playing out the string the rest of the way. I think this is fascinating. And, the fact that there's tiebreakers involved, George, make it really interesting. You take a look at the Cubs, you take a look at Miami, you take a look at Cincinnati. For me, Arizona is another team in there. I think it's really complicated. In these last 10 days, Arizona and San Francisco play, good schedules. Cincinnati and Miami do not. They've got an easier schedule. The Cubbies have a funky schedule. But, George, there's tiebreakers involved, and in some cases, the teams are in really bad shape. The Cubs don't have a good tiebreaker with anybody except San Francisco. Cincinnati's in good spots. So is Miami. Arizona's in fair spot. So if I were to pick, I would say, and I'm on record saying, I think Milwaukee is going to be a bear of a team in the postseason, George. Great starting pitching.
Yes.
A really good bullpen. And remember, you're playing 3 and 5 game series initially. You're going to see your best pitchers on the mound. I happen to think it'll be the Cubs. I'm partial. I would love to see Miami get in. My protege, Kim Ng, would be the first female general manager to lead a team to a postseason. But there's something about Cincinnati that tells me, man, don't quit on them, because they have been so unpredictably good and then sometimes unpredictably bad.
Mm-hmm.
But look at that. Whoever wins that initial series, look at who they get. You get the Dodgers. And, George, if it's Milwaukee and the Cubs, that's a civil war. I mean, it is unbelievable how much those two teams hate each other. The Cubs would have the home field, but the winner would get the Dodgers. That is not somebody you want to be playing right now.
Yeah, Milwaukee would have the home field.
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah. Milwaukee would have the home field, but they wouldn't, because that would be a Cub-friendly crowd in many cases. It would be one of the greatest best-of-3 series ever. You look at the other divisions, I think Philadelphia, Arizona could be great. And, George, as a Braves fan, you don't want to play either one of those teams.
Nope.
Those are not teams you're excited about playing. One of them ended your season last year.
Believe me,
Arizona's in a funky spot, though, because they're trying to win the playoff spot. And here's the problem. You go to October 1st, and then you open your playoffs on the 3rd, and it's best of 3. Philly's obviously the home team. If Arizona's the 5, Arizona would use their 2 best starters likely to try to get in that weekend. And all of a sudden, Kelly's not available, and either is their other starter. Zach Gallen's a tough thing for them. You go on the other side, everybody looks by Minnesota, but Minnesota's got great pitching. Seattle, Texas, you know what? Toronto. It could be a couple of really good clubs playing for the end. I still like the Mariners. If the Mariners get in, you're not going to want to play them. I like Texas over Toronto in the last part, but look who you get. And this is the way it's supposed to be. You get the Astros, who are always in the LCS, who are battle tested. But for the Twins, they suddenly don't have to get by the Yankees, which they've been doing and having trouble with for years. Tampa Bay, Toronto, George, they played each other 13 times already. I mean, that's going to be an absolute great series if it occurs. But would you want to play the Orioles? But think about it. They've played the Orioles 13 times.
Yep.
So what you'll see in that particular quadrant is you'll see teams who really know each other. It could be a heck of a lot of fun. But the National League wild card, I think it's coming down to the last 2 days of the season.
I think it is, and I think there's a real possibility that we have to play some play-in games.
Play-in games.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Can you say anarchy?
Yeah, I love it. So, should I be worried about the Braves starting pitching?
No, I don't think so, because you're narrowing the scope, George. Until you get to a 7-game LCS, I think they're in great shape. They've got a dominant guy at the top of the rotation, and in Fried, now healthy, they got one of the game's best pitchers. Charlie Morton, absolutely rock solid in this second half. And I think when you're playing a best-of-5 series, George, your starting pitching depth is not as important. One of the realities of the game that I have come to grips with is you have two different races. You have the race to get in and the race to win the last game of the season. They're entirely different when it comes to rosters, when it comes to focus, when it comes to depth. You'll never see a fifth starter. You'll never see a long man in a 7-game series, but you got to get to the 7-game series.
Yes.
And that's why I think the Braves are okay, at least in the best-of-5 LDS. And George, there's a big advantage, and I'm glad they did this in Major League Baseball. When you're one of the top 2 teams in your league, you get the bye and you get to reset. And when they start playing, I think it's on the 7th, you've got your rotation completely set. You're rested. You're in a great place. And that is a big advantage going into a 5-game series when the other team has tried to win to get in and then had a 3-game series where they had to win 2 out of 3 to just get to the next round they're playing you. Those teams are at a decided disadvantage, as well they should be. When you win over 100 games, you should have an advantage. I think it's one of the great things that baseball has done is really make it lopsided for the better clubs, and I think it's in the best interest of the game.
Last thing. Other than the 4-game series at Chavez Ravine against the Dodgers, the Braves have not played under any pressure whatsoever for months. Does that hurt them?
It hurts you a little bit, George. I was part of a couple of teams that kind of coasted in, and then suddenly, everything gets a little louder. Clubhouse gets a little tighter. It's all about routine, George. Routine is the nemesis of playoff teams. Clubs who have not been in the postseason get swarmed. They get overwhelmed by the pregame routine being as upset as it is. Instead of having 25 media people, you have 250. And your pregame routine is suddenly different. For teams who haven't been in the postseason, I'd say Baltimore. I think Baltimore would have a lot of trouble this year early because all of a sudden you've got this horde inside your clubhouse and on the field. Until you experience that, it's absolutely overwhelming and it's jarring to your pregame. But with the Braves, with the Dodgers, with the Astros, been there, done it. They know exactly what it looks like. I think the Braves will do a really good job with really good leadership, getting themselves ready. And George, let's face it, they have business to finish. They thought they should have been in the World Series last year. They and the Dodgers both thought that they were going to be the National League representatives, and they both have a score to settle in the National League this year. You're going to have no lack of focus and no lack of motivation in the National League's postseason.
Danny, was last year with the Braves more about what the Braves couldn't do and what they'd failed to do, or was it just more about the Phillies showing up to the occasion and being ready to play?
Billy, one of the worst things in the world is to play a hot team in the postseason. And baseball's, all about that day's starter and momentum. And they played a club that none of us thought was going to beat the 2 teams they played. I mean, nobody thought the Phillies were going to advance out of the first round. And then to advance and beat the Braves, no, nobody did. There were 4 or 5 upsets in the first 2 rounds of Major League Baseball last year. And it's really The scary part of the postseason is you have a team that had to win the last 3 weeks of the season. We did it in Toronto one year. We were scorching hot, came in and beat a 95-win first-seeded Texas team. Nobody expected it but us. We knew how hot we were. We were ready to play. And George, you bring up a great point. You haven't played a big game, but you know what? These guys have been around and they know what they're trying to accomplish. There'll be no problem getting them ready for those ball games.
By the way, Billy, what he said in his answer to you, my team benefited from 2 years ago.
Yes.
Red hot bullpen, Tyler Matzik, lights out. Nobody saw that coming.
Mhm.
You
No.
wouldn't have had them in the top 5 of your predictions
Yeah.
the year they won it all.
And to me, momentum in baseball is so much stronger than every other sport in the playoffs. I don't know why. I mean, do you have an answer there, Danny?
Well, first of all, it's the most unpredictable. In football, in hockey, in basketball, the home field advantage is everything. In baseball, during the regular season, you only win about 55% of your games if you're the home team. So it's not as decided. But what it really is, Billy, it's the travel, it's the flights, it's the days off in between, going from one city to the next. The team that's able to balance the craziness that is the off-season travel, where you don't even know where you're going to go, you don't know if you're going to be home. It's about getting hot, and it's a bullpen being ready and used correctly. That's where the momentum lies in baseball postseason.
And this is the time of year where I would guess that a great manager makes a great impact. That this is when you really feel it.
Well, I look at Bochy in Texas, and George, you know how well regarded he is. He manages the bullpen better than anybody in the game. So his bullpen's been sputtering. But look what the Rangers are doing. They're starting to pull back, and they're getting back into the race. The great managers, like you said, Billy, right now, this is their time. And they tell their players, hey, listen, you may not agree with what I'm doing, but my job is to get us in and win. You just do what I'm telling you and support me. And the hard part is some guys don't like the roles being changed, but the manager goes with who he feels is the right guy. And sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're wrong.
So, Billy, you just do what I tell you to do. Danny, thank you. Great stuff.
You got it, George.
What?
Have a great weekend, guys.
Hey, I'm going
See
to
ya.
call you in about 10 minutes.
Awesome.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Stay tuned.